please, as usual, we ask you to subscribe so that we are able to follow the coming episodes. Now, today we're going to talk about the realm of symbolism. You know, we must all thank President Zuma for whitening whiteness. We all saw that picture of two white people standing on the dock. This is a poignant, powerful representation of whitening whiteness. And this has created a crisis of many in the white world. And that is why we saw so many outpourings from the white journalistic world against President Zuma. Because for the first time, we see whiteness on trial. This is a fundamental move to shift our perspectives from seeing whiteness as beyond reproach, seeing whiteness as right, seeing whiteness as ethical, because that is through this mechanism and stratagems that whiteness is able to sustain itself. That is why today in South Africa, not a single white corrupt man has been sent to prison, because whiteness operates as ethical. Now, this image disrupts this edifice of white invisibility. See, whiteness is able to perpetuate itself for as long as it has, because it operates as the force that determines what is right, what is wrong, and it's always presents itself as the one in the right. So this image has created a crisis of whiteness, and the white world shall never forgive President Zuma for putting it on trial where it belongs. In fact, this image suggests that we should be seeing people like the Oppenheimers in the same situation. It is possible to imagine white power on trial through this move. So we must thank President Zuma for helping us to disrupt whiteness, even if it is temporary. Now we know that Frank Wilderson talks about how white humanity, which is what is human, is parasitic on the black. So black is always projected as already guilty, as unethical, as bad. And in this way, whiteness sustains its positionality as the ethical position. And when you disrupt this, as this image does, it creates a crisis in the white power bloc. As we say, white superiority is sustained by this symbolic place of whiteness as the ethical norm. Whiteness makes itself invisible, more so to wrongdoing. White is might and therefore is always right. Through this positioning, white crimes against blacks cannot be accounted for. Whiteness understands the power of this symbolic superiority and is aggrieved by any reduction of whiteness to the ordinary. Race is invisible to whiteness. Let's take the example of Napoleon. You know, Napoleon explained that the reason Haiti must be destroyed, the first Black Republic, where black people fought and won and created a republic where they were free in 1804 in Haiti. he makes a move, Napoleon, which questions even the over-determination of economics by Marxists, because Marxists believe that economics determines everything. No, let's listen to what Napoleon says with regard to Haiti, because Haiti defeated Napoleon, defeated the French army. And here's what Napoleon says: "My decision to destroy the authority of the black in Saint Domingo," that is Haiti, "is not so much based on considerations of commerce and money as on the need to block forever the forward march of blacks in the world." Close quote. So Napoleon understands the symbolic power of whiteness. And he says that the defeat of Haiti is not for purposes of economics or commerce or money, but it is to stop the forward march of blackness in the world. Just like, people don't realize that it would have been cheaper, it would be much cost effective for white people in the US to go to Europe and enslave Europeans. They had the capacity. Europe at the time was weak, and Europe at the time had a lot of vagabonds and other undesirable, excluded masses of white people. They could have just gone there and put them into chattel slavery, put them next to the oxen, but the symbolic power of whiteness would have been disrupted by that. And therefore they chose to spend more money to come to Africa, to catch black people, and to put them in that position. The point I'm driving forward is that we have to appreciate the power of symbolism, particularly as it pertains to whiteness. And we must also appreciate moments when we as black people are able to disrupt this edifice of white invisibility. Now we know that after the Haitian defeated Napoleon, because they did defeat Napoleon, they were made to pay reparations for defeating Napoleon. They were made to pay reparations up to the 1940s because they had been able to defeat whiteness. They say the thing that Napoleon was very concerned about, that the forward march of blacks in the world must be stopped. So it is important to recognize that black oppression is more than an economic category, the fight for the tangibles. It is also highly organized in the symbolic. We can, as individuals, temporarily, as black people, temporarily find psychological healing by standing up to white power. Now, we all know that racism is institutionalized power. We know that white power is sustained by institutions of domination, economic, political, military, knowledge production, symbolism, all of it. Now, black people, however, you can, as an individual, get a psychological state of reparation by standing up to white oppressor, the white oppressor. The one-on-one engagement, it will not end the edifice of white power, but it brings psychic healing to the individual so engaged. For instance, this situation at Stellenbosch, where the white boy comes into the room of a black boy, black student, and he urinates. The black brother takes a picture and goes complains. what would have happened if the black brother chose to fight? At that moment of fighting, his victimhood, his sense of victimhood would have been repaired, more so if he won that battle. Of course, racism would not have ended, but the satisfaction of defeating that white person at that moment brings a psychological healing which any other process cannot bring to the black person. We have the best example of this situation of disrupting symbolically and individual black deliverance, if you like. In the story told by Frederick Douglass, the former slaves, in that amazing book, Narratives of a Slave, Frederick Douglass tells us how he, as a slave, managed to get a sense of freedom as a consequence of a physical fight with the slave master. He explains there that, let me quote him, "I was somewhat unmanageable when I first went there at this vicious slave master's place. But a few months of this discipline tamed me. Mr. Covey, the slave master, succeeded in breaking me. I was crushed, my intellect languished. The disposition to read departed. The cheerful spark that lingered about my eye died. The dark night of slavery closed in upon me. And behold, a man transformed into a brute." Steve Biko also identified this state amongst black people in South Africa. And I quote him, he says, "The black man has become a shell, a shadow of a man, completely defeated, drowning in his own misery, a slave, an ox bearing the yoke of oppression with sheepish timidity." So the slave system and oppression operates on the basis of breaking down black people. And once that happens, you stop being human. You become, as both Frederick Douglass says and Steve Biko, an oxen who accepts his oppression and misery with sheepish timidity. Now, there are instances, as we say, of fighting against this institutional oppression. As we know, Frederick Douglass fought Covey, this master. And, when you read that passage, it is, you can Google it, by the way. You can Google Frederick Douglass fight with Covey. And you will get the description there. He speaks about how Covey got behind him, held him, and he started fighting and was beating him. And Covey called on a black brother to come, another slave. And Frederick Douglass says he kicked the slave to the corner, and he was holding himself from these broken ribs, apparently. And he dealt with the white man. At the end of that fight, the white man says, "I would have gotten you." Frederick Douglass says, "Of course, yes, I got the better of you." But the important thing, I think, also symbolically at that point of a fight, is when the black brother comes to assist the white man. Now the attention of Brother Frederick Douglass is divided. He has to deal with the sellout. And in that moment, of course, he could have given the chance for the white man to defeat him. And this is the problematic of black revolutionary struggles all the time, where when we're faced with the enemy, it's always able to mobilize some amongst us to his assistance, and we are forced to deal with the sellout, the middleman, the agent. And when we do so, we spend too much time fighting the wrong battle. I mean, right now in South Africa, for instance, you have people like Nhlanhla, you have people like Penwell, you have Musi Maimani, you have Mashaba, you have the ANC, all these bodyguards of whiteness, which are creating so much friction and energy and requiring us to pay attention to them instead of dealing with the real enemy. The real enemy, of course, always generates these elements amongst the oppressed and finding its own sustenance when we spend time in conflict amongst ourselves. So we know from Frederick Douglass that individual acts of resistance can bring about a sense of self-relief. Then we have another brilliant example of how when you stand up against your oppressor as a black person, you reach a sense of freedom. Elrich Cleaver, the former Panther, we know that that man has a very checkered history. He was started as a black panther. He started as a criminal, petty criminal, a rapist. He transformed himself into a revolutionary and a proper fighting, brave revolutionary. I mean, the history of Elrich Cleaver is really, really amazing. I mean, he even managed to hijack planes of the Americans, take them to one of the African states and demanded ransom, and took that money, fund some of the revolutionary programs. Elrich Cleaver was a proper revolutionary before, of course, turning into a reactionary who even joined the Republicans and apologized for his revolutionary moves when he was younger. Well, it can happen to most. But here, Elrich Cleaver, when he was still with the Panthers, he explains the moment. He says it was days after the murder of the assassination of Brother Martin Luther King. And he says there were 14 of them as Panthers. They were armed. And they went down to town. And there they started a shootout of 1.5 hours. 1.5 hours they were shooting the police. And the police were shooting them. He says there were 14 of them. Of course, it was close to where Huey Newton was murdered. I think again symbolically, when you reclaim your humanity through fighting, and it's associated with the place where Huey Newton, one of the most respected Black Panthers, was murdered. This is a symbolically very fulfilling and powerful intervention. So he says we're well armed. When we had a shootout that lasted 1.5 hours, and here's the important message I want you to take. He says, I will tell anybody that was the first experience of freedom that I had. He says, I will tell anybody that was the first experience of freedom that I had. I was free for 1.5 hours because during that time, the repressive forces couldn't put their hands on me because we were shooting it out with them for 1.5 hours. His sense of freedom, all his other life as a black person in America, he felt oppressed. But once at war, shooting out with the settlers of America, he felt freedom. Now that is the same freedom that most of us derive when you look at that picture of whiteness on the dock, of whiteness having to answer for its crimes. It brings a sense of psychological deliverance, as it were. Now, we know that the white power structure understands and fears the most these moments of black freedom. It is for this reason any whitening of whiteness and its presentation as unethical creates a serious crisis in the symbolic order of whiteness. And it cannot be allowed, and it is punished severely. You know, we must remember how in this realm of symbolism, when the white establishment started fighting Jacob Zuma, they created that moment of the spear. Remember, when Jacob Zuma was painted in the motif of Lenin, but with his drawn so-called private parts exposed. It was the most racist, the most demeaning, the most violent representation of blackness. But it was part of reducing Jacob Zuma symbolically, because whiteness had realized that his position was to fight white power, was to fight white monopoly capital. And therefore, to reduce him, to dehumanize him, they created that representation of Zuma as basically an unthinking black man governed by his fellows, a subhuman proper. That is the power of symbolism, and the White Project understands it. And that is why this particular representation of whites in the dog is such a powerful move to whiten whiteness. And we must thank President Zuma for doing this, putting whites where they belong, in the dog. Julius says he can see the youth are unhappy, they are angry, they are agitated, they want revolution. And that revolution will be unled. And an unled revolution will destroy the status quo.
July and September quarter is down for the first time in 3 years.
Right, the local market, I imagine, was positive to Minister Godongwana.
Yeah, a positive response to that particular speech. The all share up close to 2%. All indices on the JSE were up.
Political battle that follows me is, why do you support President Zuma? Why do you support a man who's accused of corruption, and some say a man responsible for all the mess that we find ourselves in today? Supporting President Zuma has been politically costly for me as well, in our movement, Black First, Land First. A lot of people have said that we have squandered the goodwill that comes with our position of anti-corruption, for instance, or our ethical politics, which are pure, clean, put black people first. By our association with Zuma, we have corrupted that vision that people have of us and our politics. They claim that we've become just like all political parties. We are bought, they say. The Guptas paid us to support Zuma. Well, in this episode, I'm going to try to explain
Okay, you can take it if you want.
our position to support President Zuma from our ideological standpoint and how is it consistent with our principles. It's a revolutionary black consciousness.
Bye-bye.
Now, some people have even reminded me that I had written in 2009 an essay from Mbeki to Zuma, what is the difference? And in that essay, I argued that Mbeki is a market fundamentalist and Zuma is a populist. And they're just two sides of the same neoliberal coin coming from the ANC. However, if you read that essay carefully, you will see I do make the provision that Zuma is going to be left with two options: either to give bullets to the people or to defect from the system and serve the people. I was skeptical about whether Zuma will in fact make that break with capital, which was Mbeki's project. Zuma inherited a neoliberal state which had already started